So today we have a series of talks from 3 different people, and the first will be Mark Wirschem, and he's from the King County Juvenile Treatment Services. So he'll be starting off, and it will basically cover the referral and treatment with evidence-based practices in the court system. So, and then our second speaker will be Carolyn Frimpter, and she's a social worker through the Guardian Ad Litem program through CASA. And then we have Bill Barrett from Children's Administration, and he's actually going to begin our talk today. And don't worry. And he is with Children's Administration as an area administrator. Okay. All right. So I will, in order to make sure we make the most use of our time, I'll have you go ahead and start. Okay? And if you have questions, I will hand around the microphone so we can make sure we get it on the video.
Hi. My name is Bill Barrett. I'm an administrator at Children's Services. I've been with the department now for just shy of 20 years. And when I came to the department for mental health almost 20 years ago, we were still handwriting our case notes. We didn't have a data system. We made friends with our providers, and our providers who provided good services to us, we used them over and over again. And very, very understandable back in the day. Over time, things changed. We brought in computer systems. The computer systems gave us the ability to track our volume. It gave us the ability to start tracking our outcomes. It gave us the ability to see in almost real time where we're spending our money. Over the years, the computer systems became more and more sophisticated, giving us a better look at our practice. And I would say in the past 10 years, there has been a tremendous push toward using evidence-based practices, not only at Children's Services, looking at data, in other words, looking at data, at Children's Services, but in mental health, in just about any field, engineering, in medicine, right? And I don't think that it's unusual to think that as technology has evolved, so has how our ability to be able to use that technology and incorporate it into our practice. Okay. So at Children's Services, our technology has evolved, our systems have evolved. The one thing that has not changed is that we are the agency that is solely responsible for investigating allegations of abuse and neglect and ensuring that children are safe in the homes. And if they are not safe, if we cannot provide services to ensure their safety in the home, then we are charged with bringing the children into care, and that requires legal action. When children are into care, we try to provide services to ameliorate the issue so we can return the children home or move them on toward permanency. As data systems have gotten better, we've been able to track things like length of stay. We've been able to track outcomes, permanency outcomes. And so this has all been incorporated into the array of services that we currently provide. When I came into this department, the single largest expenditure for in-home services was family preservation services. And it was family preservation services for years. CPS workers used it, child welfare services workers used it, family reconciliation services workers used it. The court ordered it frequently, okay? But what is FPS? As we call it, what is FPS? Well, the research showed it's pretty much whatever you wanted to make it. And that we could not track the outcomes with family preservation services. It was anything but an evidence-based practice. Okay. We've had a long-standing relationship with a model called home builders, which is an evidence-based practice. My understanding is they've been around since 1974. And the data showed that home builders reduce the recidivism or the likelihood of receiving another CPS referral if you put the service in place. And that was, back in the day, that was pretty much the only evidence-based practice that we would refer to, because it was the only one that we really had access to or had a contract with. As time went on, we became introduced to other practices. As I remember, DYS, or JRA at the time, brought up FFT, family functional therapy. And so that added to our, quote, service array. We started using family functional therapy to work with adolescent children who are having problems with the legal system, and conflicts at home. Then there was some groundbreaking legislation a few years ago that required the DSHS and the agencies that serve children and families to prioritize the use of evidence-based practices. Wow. What does that mean? That is really a game changer for the field. What does that mean? As a social worker for years, you've come in, you've done your CPS investigations. I'm going to put FPS in here. And then I'm going to transfer the case over to Family Voluntary Services, right? So what does this mean? I can no longer use FPS. What are these services about? Okay. We'll talk a little bit about what a ground level look of what services look like to a social worker at Children's Services. Everything in Children's Services starts with a referral. So if you're a CPS worker, you get a referral. Okay, the referral will have an allegation of abuse and neglect. You go out, you do the face-to-face visit, you make a determination, initial determination of safety and if services are indicated. Okay, you're working on a timeline here. You have to see the family within either 24 or 72 hours. Okay, you don't have a lot of time to do an assessment, but that's very important time. You focus strictly on the assessment, what's going on. Can we possibly plug services into place for this family? And if so, what services do we have? In CPS, you're going to be moving out of that. You're going to be closing your case in CPS in 45 to 60 days. Okay, so you don't have a lot of time. And when you get a referral into CPS, there are only 3 possible dispositions. You close the case, you refer the case to Family Voluntary Services for ongoing voluntary services, or you file dependency and the case goes over to CWS. So those are the only 3 outcomes. And that's going to happen in 45 to 60 days. Okay. So when we're a CPS worker going out into the field and investigating, we have to think of what services apply to the specific situation. We need services that can be delivered within that time frame. Home builders can be delivered in 30 days. If you look on the board, you can see home builders on the far right-hand side. It serves families with children birth to 18 years old. It's an in-home service. It can be delivered in 4 weeks with model fidelity. And we can, as we go on down through the slide, it gives the social worker just a little more guidance in the type of cases and situations that it would be appropriate for. Another service that's used, as we call it, on the front end often is PFR. It's our newest addition to the service array. It's promoting first relationships. Okay, and promoting first relationships is a coaching model with parents birth to 3, and we typically use these on lower risk cases. And this service can be delivered with model fidelity within the CPS timelines. Okay. We have also family functional therapy. That's for adolescent children 11 to 18 years old. That's an in-home service. It can be provided in long-term foster homes. It's not made for a transient sort of situation. PCIT, parent-child interactive therapy. Okay. That's often an in-clinic, can be an in-home parent coaching model that's used for children 2 to 7 years old. What happens if you get a referral for an 8-year-old child in PCIT? You can't take it. So this brings us to something called model fidelity. We have an array or a group of different services that we use. Okay. For years and years and years, social workers have argued with attorneys about which provider to use, which service to use. Oh, the fights would go on quite a while out in the halls. The thing about evidence-based practices is you're buying a model, you're buying a practice. These practices adhere strictly to model fidelity. It's not about the provider, all things being equal. All things being equal, it's not the provider. So if you're getting PCIT at Harborview, it should be the exact same model that you're getting in Whatcom County, that you're getting in Spokane. it's not supposed to be about the provider. It's supposed to be about the model. And I think this is something that will ultimately bring parties together. And once the courts become more familiar with this, once defense counsel becomes more familiar with the different models, that it'll be more about, PCIT, not about the specific provider. I'll just cover Incredible Years very quickly. Incredible Years is basically, it's a parenting class. It's a parenting class that breaks out into three distinct age groups. Notice also where I say FAR compatible. FAR is an alternative to CPS. It's new. It's still being implemented across the state. FAR is an alternate response for low-risk referrals for families that could benefit from an intervention rather than an investigation. Okay, so FAR has a 45-day timeline on it. Okay, so when we provide services, we need to be very timely about making those referrals, and we also need to make sure that we're making referrals that can be provided within the 45 days, again, with model fidelity. This has required some modification from the model owners to allow us to be able to do that. For example, Safe Care is, as you see, is FAR compatible. That means that they've allowed us to do sessions twice weekly and to be able to use 2 of the 3 modules that would normally be used in a CPS or a CWS case, to be able to provide that within the 45-day time frame. I know I'm jumping around a lot. Is this making sense? Are we doing okay? Okay. So back 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if we had an adolescent in conflict, serious conflict with his parents, chances are we made a referral for what was called CFI, right? That was, again, another one of those sort of FPS-like cases. It was services. It remained open for 30 to 45 days, but there was no evidence behind it. Now we'd be much more inclined to refer to FFT or to Triple P. And Triple P is the Positive Parenting Program. So we have an array in Children's Services of 6 services currently that we contract for and that we can refer to. There are far more evidence-based practices out there that are also available in the community. I'm only talking about what's available within Children's Services. I think it's important to note that DBHR, for mental health, community mental health, has evidence-based practices available. You know, we see AFCBT, okay, is becoming more and more available. More and more therapists are being trained up on that. And if you go, I don't know if anybody here has been to the California Clearinghouse of Evidence-Based Practices. Oh, I see a yes. Good. It's a great website that gives you a thumbnail sketch, okay, of evidence-based practices and how they relate to child welfare. They give them a rating of 1 to, I think it is 5 or 1 to 3. And so our current array of evidence-based practices includes Triple P, which is the Positive Parenting Program, Safe Care, which is basically for cases of neglect and where parents need education, Incredible Years, which I've always billed as an evidence-based parenting class, PCIT. PCIT is Parent-Child Interactive Therapy. It is, I was thrilled that we were able to get this contract, because this is as close as we have truly to a mental health intervention in our array of services as we can have. FFT, Family Functional Therapy, PFR, and Home Builders. Right now, we're gathering data on the efficacy of these services. We can track who these services have been provided to. We can see what the outcomes were. Did children Were children in care at the time of service? Did children enter into care after service was provided? And I think this will help guide us over time in our service array. The thing about children's services is everything is continuing to evolve. And I don't see that stopping anytime soon. The legislation that propelled us toward prioritizing evidence-based practices is still new. It's still new. We're just moving out of the implementation phase, I would say, and getting into the place where we can evaluate the progress that we've made so far. To a social worker, to somebody in the field who is carrying cases, it's important for them to know what they're getting when they make a referral, what the family is getting. If they're going to make a referral to Safe Care, it's important for them to know what that is and how that's going to help their family. The same is true with Incredible Years and PCIT. And so that is one of the great differences between what we're doing now and what we were doing in what I would call the FPS years. Even FPS is currently under redesign, and we're trying to make it more evidence-informed, but that right now is a work in progress. So, does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Could you, just based on what you were just saying, could you kind of talk about the process that a social worker would use for determining, which of these services would be most appropriate, how they're trained on that, and how the referral process works?
Absolutely. Yeah. The referral process right now is very mechanical. We have our own internal database, and in there it contains the referral form. They fill out the form, boom, and they send it to the provider. But how do they know what service to use? How do they know what service to use? I think that's the most important thing. Is like, well, if you're going to use an evidence-based practice, you have to use one that fits. Let's start. If you have to have somebody in the home tomorrow, it's potentially a very volatile situation. I got to have somebody in the home tomorrow. There's only one one contract that we carry that has that response time. Home builders. Okay, so that's our emergent service. It's really our stabilization service. How do social workers know that? We have an internal website that explains the services. All the social workers have this handout that you have, and every Tuesday, like clockwork, during the lunch hour, there's an email that goes out, and frankly, it goes out statewide, with the availability of the providers, a brief description of the service, okay, and what programs the service would apply to. We need to do more training, and we will do more training on evidence-based practices and what's going to fit. We have to figure out what that training is going to look like and how it's going to fit with the service array. So how does a social worker know? They have hard copies, they have emails, and of course they have their supervisors. In DCFS, in Children's Services, supervisors uphold the clinical standard. They are the clinical supervisors, not the area administrators. We run a business. Okay, it's the supervisors. They are closest to the work. They make sure that the work is being provided, the services are being provided timely, according to policy, and then are appropriate to the family. The agency could not run without supervisors. Yeah.
Because the issue of access and interest level on the part of diverse populations in evidence-based practice has been a conversation that's been carried on fairly significantly. You have data that support or to identify that access and completion of evidence-based practice is distributed amongst the ethnic and racial populations who are served by children's administration.
You know, I have seen a lot of data, and off the top of my head, I think I think Tim Kelly has some data on that, and I can get that from him for you. That of course is really, really key. That our services truly serve effectively a diverse clientele, a diverse population, and that we also have diversity in our providers. In King County, well, let's just say Region 2. That's the old, from King County up to Bellingham. We have an incredibly rich provider network with large providers that you may be familiar with. IFD, Institute for Family Development, is a large provider. Working Choice is a large provider, and then very small individual practitioners. And on any given Tuesday, we will probably have 200 slots immediately available for an evidence-based practice on any, and that's public. Like I said, that's published to the field every Tuesday. They get it between 12 and 1 o'clock. If you want the data, I really will ask Tim about that and see if I can get that for you.
I was interested whether you had any sense of that and whether that's a topic of discussion. That in fact that the availability, obviously we know that the availability of these practices there are challenges, particularly in rural areas, for families to get access to these. But I'm just wondering, here in King County, or this region, would we be utilizing, with the families involved in child welfare, be utilizing these services at the same rate as someone in Thurston Mason or Spokane?
Great question. Great question. I can tell you, I looked at the numbers this morning. I'm always playing around with the numbers. Currently, the state, 52% of the in-home service dollars, with the exception of visitation, okay, let's pull that out, of the in-home service dollars are now spent on evidence-based practices. In Region 2, in other words, from here to Bellingham, we're right at 80%. Now, we have rural areas in Western Washington, but it's very, very different than what you have over in Eastern Washington. Our rural areas are maybe a half-hour drive to a population center. Okay, Region 2 has far and away the highest utilization, far and away, and you know, we have program managers over on the east side who are trying to increase the utilization over there. One of the big challenges you have in Eastern Washington is distance. And you know, there are very, very few providers over there. I would say percentage-wise, yeah. I mean, I know that their percentage of EVP utilization is much lower.
One of the things we ask ourselves in the CASA program a lot is, what's the difference between Triple P, Safe Care, and Incredible Years? Which one should we recommend in different circumstances? Okay.
Well, we have some of the qualifying information right here at the top. Triple P is probably our most malleable service. Okay, it says from 2 to 16. Actually, it can be provided all the way up to 18-year-old children, 17-year-old children with model fidelity. But think of Triple P as think of it more as talk therapy. Would you really be using talk therapy with a child that's young, as opposed to something like Safe Care? When I think of Safe Care, I think of neglect. I think of parents, young parents, we'll say, or older, but typically young parents who need education, who need information. So, there are young parents, we'll say, who don't know that that it's not safe, that they have to lock up the medication so the children can't get near them, or that they have to protect the wall outlet so kids don't stick their knives. And it's more of an educational sort of things. And the modules, will speak to, safe home, a healthy baby, etc. Incredible years, well, that's a parenting class. And so that's actually currently our only service that uses a group setting. And there are some advantages to using the group settings. TCIT. This service is often provided, as they say, in clinic. It can be provided in home, but it's often provided in the office. Family functional therapy is almost always provided in the home. And of course, PFR is provided in the home.
So if you had a parent with a developmental delay,
okay.
Would you be able to change the way the information is delivered or the service is delivered to accommodate that?
Well, we talk about model fidelity, okay? And so all of these different services have different models that must be strictly adhered to. And so sometimes a parent with a developmental disability may not necessarily be suitable for a certain service because they just cognitively can't make use of the information. And I'm wondering if we actually put in here information scroll down we try to help the social workers and just say, we're not using this service for parents with these presenting problems. So we try to help narrow down the selection. This has really been exciting. We are definitely transforming the way social workers utilize services. Are we seeing the outcomes yet? It might be a little soon to tell. What would we want to see out of this? We would want to see more children safely staying in their home. We want to see less children coming into care. We would like to see shorter lengths of stay. Right? We would like to be able to see more children returning home or moving on to permanency more quickly. That's really why we provide services. And at the top of the page, it'll say there's usually just a little note. If you think about it, basically we're either trying to prevent placement or we're trying to reunify. And there are many services out there that we don't currently contract with that are excellent services. This is our starting point. And I do believe that these are always open to evaluation. And of course, that's not at the headquarters level. It's not me. Okay. Well, thank you.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Frimpter. I'm a guardian ad litem now. I used to be a CASA supervisor, but as of next week, I'm going to be a guardian ad litem in the dependency CASA program. We're a part of the Superior Court. And I can answer questions. I'm not going to talk much about the CASA program today, but I can answer questions about it afterwards if people are interested. So I wrote this little presentation for you guys because I understood that most of you are service providers or will be service providers. And I was trying to remember what it was like for me before I was really enmeshed in the dependency system and really used to the weird ways it works. So I thought I'd sort of outline some of the ways it works, and then I'll move on to some practice tips for how to interact with this system. And just keep in mind that those are just my practice tips. They're not the CASA programs. And it's just, you can do whatever you want. It's just my suggestion. Okay, so what is dependency? Dependency is the court structure that allows the government to intervene in people's lives in order to protect a child who is abused, neglected, or has no parent available to care for them. And the goals of dependency are child safety, and at CASA we'd also say in child well-being, and the other goal is family reunification. And it's important to remember that the state, the power of the state to intervene in people's lives is limited. Sometimes people get frustrated, they don't understand why the state isn't doing more. It's because the court will allow them to do more a lot of the time. So when a case is brought to court by DCFS, Division of Children and Family Services, the court determines whether the child is actually in need of the protection of the court. And then the court makes certain court orders, which include issues like placement, where the child is placed in foster care or with relatives or with another suitable adult. Also, they address visits. Their parental visits almost always provided. Sometimes they need to be professionally supervised. Sometimes they don't. And then the duration and frequency are spelled out. I think anybody who's involved in the child welfare system knows that this is an area of frustration because there isn't much supervision available. So to the extent that we can find supervisors who are not professional supervisors, but just people in the family community who can assist with this, the better, because then the visitation actually happens. And then there's services that are designed to help reunify the family. And these are usually not ordered in the beginning of the case. They're ordered a little bit later on because adjudication has to happen. So the court has to determine that officially the child is abused or neglected or has no parent available to care for them, and that takes a little time. That takes a few months. Other service I didn't mention here, but also there are services that can be ordered for the child, and it's often the CASA volunteer who's bringing that up. So, now this is where what Bill was saying comes in. The court requires the DCFS to make reasonable efforts to reunify the family. And what you're supposed to do is identify what they call the parental deficiencies. What are the problems that this family has? And then look at a service that might be able to assist with that. Now, I think we could probably dream up much more specific recommendations than these that I listed, but you get the idea. If somebody has a chemical dependency problem, and that's in the majority of our cases, there's chemical dependency problems, then chemical dependency treatment and urinalysis is ordered. If there is a mental health problem, then mental health treatment, and you get the idea. For domestic violence, the DV perpetrator would be ordered to do treatment. The victim would not be ordered to do treatment, but we would encourage them to get some support. Intellectual disabilities, that's the reason I asked this question earlier. It comes up a lot. I don't think we have a lot of good answers for this issue. What we certainly need to do is tailor our services to the cognitive abilities of the parent we're trying to work with. Sexual abuse of a child, then you would identify sexual deviance evaluation and treatment. And if there's physical abuse, something like parent-child interactive therapy. I don't know if you have other ideas besides that, Bill. That one? PCIT, yeah. Yeah. And one thing to keep in mind is sometimes I talk to family members and foster parents who are confused about why the court is allowing time to go by and providing services to the parents. We're required to do that. We're required to provide services even when the prognosis is poor. And the services that we have available aren't magic wands. We still have to make what the court calls reasonable efforts. Otherwise, the case can't move forward, the parental rights can't be terminated, the child can't be adopted, etc. Here's an example of the limited power of the state. The court must authorize involuntary removal of children from their parents. That's not the case in all states, but often people think that the social worker has the authority to simply remove children, and that's not the case. And relative placements are prioritized in the law. Now, this is very important if you are not a party to a case and you are working with a family who is involved in the child welfare system. It's very important to know who is a party to the case and who isn't. And The parties are the parents and their attorneys, and each parent should be assigned an attorney, a public defender. Occasionally, people can afford private attorneys. The reason why each parent gets a different attorney is because their interests, if they don't differ when they come into the case, guaranteed they're going to differ by the time a year goes by. So they will almost always have separate counsel. The DCFS social worker and the assistant attorney general assigned to the case are other parties. And the youth or the child are represented by either or both a court-appointed special advocate or an attorney. This is an area of a lot of controversy right now, but I think I can describe sort of the differences between a CASA volunteer or guardian ad litem and an attorney for the child. A CASA volunteer is supposed to advocate for the best interest of the child. Usually we represent kids who are under 12. Sometimes I represent a child who is 14, but he's severely developmentally delayed. He did have an attorney assigned to him, but she eventually dropped the case because she couldn't communicate with him. So we are supposed to be evaluating what's the best thing for this child. And we are also the eyes and ears of the court. We're supposed to be completely transparent. We tell the court and all the other parties exactly what we know, whether or not it supports our ultimate recommendation. That is not the case for the attorney for the child. The attorney for the child can keep secrets with the child. They are their expressed wishes advocate. So I used to work at one of the public defender agencies as a social worker, and the attorneys would be sometimes frustrated because their client, age 12, sexually abused by dad, wants to return to dad. What do they have to do? They have to go into court and recommend that and push for that expressed wish. And how people handle that ethical. So, from an attorney point of view, it isn't really an ethical conflict, but it might be on a personal level, right? Anyway, so attorneys are assigned to kids over 12, and there is new legislation now that if a child has been legally free for more than 6 months, then they get an attorney. This includes toddlers, and they are supposed to advocate for the child's express wishes. I'm glad I don't have to do that. I think and it really varies on regarding how the attorneys do this. Some attorneys do it more like a CASA does it, and some attorneys, they really just try to take the express wishes and run with it. And another party that I neglected to add is the tribe. If there is if it's an Indian Child Welfare Act case, then the tribe can intervene and be a full party to the case. They don't necessarily agree with the parents. They have separate interests that they are pursuing. So any questions about that? Mm-hmm.
So did I hear you right that the 12 and older rule or practice is now, that's like a thing of the past, and now every child will have an attorney?
So there's a movement to give every child an attorney, every single child in dependencies an attorney. That is not the case right now. The practice in King County is 12 and under, under 12 CASA, 12 and over attorney. And if we are representing a kid who turns 12, often we'll stay on to assist the attorney with the transition. If that child's wishes and interests are very clearly different, which sometimes is the case, then we'll stay on. Just last week, in a situation like that, child wanted to return home. CASA knew it wasn't a good idea, and the attorney was trying to get the CASA off the case because they disagreed. So there's some conflicts inherent in this model, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just what it is.
Okay, so it is changing that each child will have an attorney as separate from the CASA, I guess.
The Bar Association would like that to happen.
Okay, got it.
But
Yeah.
we're a state. We're different than most other states. Where most other states, a child will have an attorney.
Correct. And so the children that are represented by CASAs and by guardians ad litem, like myself, we have attorneys that represent us in court, but it's best interest advocacy. It's not express wishes advocacy. Make sense? Okay. Okay, so what's really important to remember when you're working with families in the child welfare system is who the non-parties are. Non-parties do not have any access to the sealed files. They don't have any right to the private information regarding the parents or the children. And these folks are foster parents and caregivers, relatives, grandparents, teachers, service providers, and everybody else. This can seem a little bit counterintuitive, especially if you're working with a child who's in a foster care situation or place with relatives. The people who have the most intimate contact with the child are not entitled to the information regarding that child's child welfare case. So if you are, say, providing therapy to a child and talking to their caregiver about the child welfare case, you might not be getting accurate information, or more likely, you're not getting complete information. And it's super important to remember that, because if you're asked to make recommendations, you could make recommendations based on incomplete information. So there are hearings that happen periodically. The least frequent are about 6 months apart. And these are open to the public. So people who can come and observe the hearings, but they can't get the materials that have been provided to the court. And the court will review the compliance and progress of the parents in their efforts to reunite with their children. So they'll say, you were ordered to do PCIT. I'm going to say you're doing partial compliance because you only showed up to half of the appointments, and then you had a positive UA, something like that. And the idea is to give feedback to everybody about, okay, are we going where we want to go in this? And then there's the permanent plan. This is often confusing to people too. The court will identify a permanent plan or permanent plans. So for instance, it might be adoption with an alternative return home. So that means the court thinks that adoption is the most likely thing that will happen, and return home is still a possibility. Or it could be a sole plan of return home. I've seen many relatives and foster parents get upset when they attend these hearings because they think it sounds for all the world like when the court says, I have identified the permanent plan of return home, that's what's going to happen. That's not, it's just a plan. It's just saying this is the direction this case is going in. If we keep going down this path, that's what's happening. And it's very important to remember that the timing has everything to do with how, what kind of permanent plan is identified. So earlier on in the case, in the first year or so, the court is much, much more likely to retain a permanent plan of return home if the parent has any activity at all. Does that mean that a return home is really likely? I would say not necessarily. The court does not want to discourage parents. So any questions about that? Okay. So the time frames, how long do these cases take? I tell volunteers when we're interviewing them, because we want them to stay on for the whole case, they take about 2.5 years to get through. A child might return home to a parent, and then it would be much faster, depending on how quickly that parent can get themselves into a situation where the child can return to them safely. But if they are not able to return to a parent, I would say about approximately 2 years from the filing of the case into an adoption or a guardianship. The federal law requires the court to order the department to file a termination petition if the child cannot return home during a certain period of time. I would say approximately 1.5 years. And the termination petition is another legal action, and the idea that what's being asked of the court is to basically divorce the child and the parent so that the child is legally free for adoption. And the dependency doesn't end until the child either returns home and the court ends the supervision, or if adoption or guardianship occur, or if the child ages out, which is not an ideal outcome. Any questions about that? Okay. Now I'm getting to the sort of tips phase of my talk. I want to talk about the difference between service providers and lawyers. Lawyers and service providers and social workers have very, very different viewpoints. It's easy to forget that. When you're talking to a lawyer, it's easy to forget that their ethics are very different, their perspective is very different, and it's almost as though they come from different planets. So we have Captain Kirk talking to Giant Lizard Man here. They have to talk to each other through a translator because they speak different languages and they're from different worlds. So I'm continuing the Star Trek theme. Mr. Spock says, insufficient facts always invite danger, Captain. And this is very true of dependencies, and what I wish more service providers were aware of when they're asked to make a recommendation regarding a determination of the court. If you don't have enough information about what's going on in the case, you could make a recommendation that doesn't make any sense to anybody else. This would affect your credibility regarding other aspects of that we really do need to know about, like your credibility, your understanding of the family situation, your area of expertise regarding therapy with the family. So I said that. One big exception is we still really rely on child therapists. I'm sorry, what? Time. Okay. One big exception is we really rely on child therapists to help us determine when it's safe for a child to interact with a parent who, I should say, emotionally safe. Parent wants to have wants to talk with the child, wants to visit with the child. Child has been traumatized, and the therapist can give us some guidelines on that. But please be willing to provide us with facts and educate us, including the court, about your area of expertise. That can be really, really helpful. So going quickly through this, I don't want to discourage anybody from trying to have an impact on the dependency system. We are a chronically under-resourced system, and squeaky wheels make all the difference. So I strongly recommend, if you have a concern about a child, call the CASA program, call the social worker, keep calling until somebody listens. If there is something, a safety concern, obviously you call CPS, and there's the number 1-866 end harm. Consider who your allies are and talk to that person. It might be the defense attorney. Remember that defense attorneys have social workers, and they're a very valuable resource. Also, the Family and Children's Ombudsman is another place to go if you have a concern. So that's it. That's me. You can people can feel free to call me if they have questions. Does anybody have any questions now? Okay.
Thank you, Carolyn.
My name is Mark Wirschem. I'm the Juvenile Treatment Services Manager for King County Superior Court. An honor to be here. I see three of my very dear colleagues, Drs. Truppen, Bruns, and Pullman here, that have moved mountains to make this happen, that results in what we're able to provide King County children. So I couldn't be more thrilled or humbled. So I'll see how fast I can go. Let's see. Learning objectives. Yeah. How we screen and assess, key components to implementing within the existing juvenile justice and treatment systems. Most important, I think, is successfully sustaining EVPs. Our population in King County's, Martin Luther King County's juvenile court is what we're all about. And everything we've done and everything I'm going to talk about is based on what our population looks like, which most of you are probably aware of, disproportionately living in poverty, disproportionately having significant behavioral health challenges and needs, and disproportionately youth of color. And I'm not going to talk a lot about the disparity right now. You're going to hear some data about a tremendous reduction in crime in folks coming to juvenile justice today. Unfortunately, proportionately, youth of color are still there. In fact, the past year increased. We now have over half our population in juvenile detention, African Americans, for the first time ever. 73% mental health substance abuse disorders. We increasingly see multiple disorders. We have some tools that we use. We used to see 1 or 2 disorders. Now we see 3 to 5. So our kids are much more clinically complex. Most of them have been victimized, high rates of PTSD. These last 2 are real interesting and related to our prior presenters too. We're serving the same kids. Child maltreatment is one of the single greatest predictors of substance abuse and also of entering juvenile justice. 2/3 of King County children involved with child welfare entered the juvenile justice system. When you look at racial disparity, it dramatically is exasperate and increase is amongst that 2/3 of the population. Reclaiming Futures is a 10-year integration of substance abuse treatment practices. Our probation practices are completely different than they were 15 years ago. We have a juvenile justice assessment team, and I'll go over our menu, similar to children's. And this is interesting too. Within the substance abuse treatment community here, our most meaningful measure of success is retention, and we've gone from 54% to 74%, 77% over the past 11 years. We have a concurrent, this is how we decide which service the child and family gets. First, we have a risk assessment based on the Hawkins-Catalano work, risk and protective factors. We have 10 domains, and it actually populates what evidence-based programs would be recommended based on the score from that tool. So if you have high risk going on in the family domain, you're going to be matched to some of the family interventions that I'll refer to. Concurrently, and this is real important, based on behavioral health needs, we do clinical assessment. We have a juvenile justice assessment team. We have 7 or 8 professionals, cross-discipline. We have Latina-specific and African-American specific specialists, mental health, chemical dependency, psychologists, and psychiatric consultation. Here's some of the tools we use. The most important thing here is not over-assessing and matching assessment to the needs of the child. So we ask people when they refer for clinical services, what do you want? What do you want? What's the question that we want answered? So then we can match within that team the range of testing or assessment. So here's our King County, Martin Luther King County menu of services. In old school, which I am, there's a hole in this, and you can put it on the wall. And everywhere you go in juvenile court, and with a lot of apartments, you'll see this. And our judges' chambers, so they know what these are, probation counselors, social workers, etc. And I'll go over this menu briefly. I think probably some just concepts of how it's shaped. We've talked about this, clinical assessment. Increasingly, we're doing a much better job of integrating trauma screening. We do that with any assessment we do, given the needs. I'll come back to that in a bit. Here are the programs with the most research. Washington Institute for Public Policy, the University of Washington, and others have looked at where there were meta-analysis on multiple randomized clinical trials. And the first one doesn't have those yet. The Institute for Public Policy is currently working with what the statewide program is called Coordination of Services. We call our program Parent-Youth Connection Seminars. I won't go into detail with each of these. There's our 3 family therapies, FFT, MST, and FIT, that's provided in partnership with the university here. And all these have very solid evidence that they significantly reduce recidivism, chances of coming back, and cost benefits to the public. Our menu goes on. CSAC, we know very little. We're partnering with the university on evaluating a 5-year effort to How do we work with kids that are commercially sexually exploited? There's no clear evidence-based practices, and so what we're looking at is what's the continuum that needs to happen to get these kids out of their life. Wrap around, we have an African-specific mentoring program. I manage both juvenile drug court and a family treatment court in the child welfare system. Step Up is for kids that where there's family violence. And then we have constantly changing depending on revenue, education, employment, training. The other thing about our population, 80% of our kids don't see themselves finishing high school or finishing on time. So these are efforts to guide kids back into an educational path and meaningful work, not just picking up stuff or working outside. We used to have tattoo removal. It's not evidence-based. I'm looking for a new partner, if you got one. So here's some of the work from the Washington State Institute for Public Policy. As you can see, for every $1,473 spent through aggression replacement training, the benefit to our citizens is $65,000 and so forth. I want to make a comment here. The more clinically complex and the more needy the family is, these, like, for example, family integrated transitions, the net benefit isn't as high, but these are very costly programs. We absolutely have to have that mix. We need this whole menu of services because some kids will not make it through those that are cheaper to provide. And so we're constantly looking at revenue to keep those going. What else we got? I'm going to start presenting some data, some trend data. And this chart shows reductions in filings and reductions in youth incarcerated in King County. And the intention here is it says evidence-based program implementation. We really began that in 1999 until now. And so when we see these successful trends, I'll give you a little more detail in a minute. What's that related to? I mean, we have a lot of research specific to our interventions, real good research, but how do we know we're successfully implementing those, holding to fidelity? In an aggregate sense, since we have such a magnificent menu of services, are we doing the right thing and the right matching? And then there's other reforms that have occurred over the past 15 years on there too. This is a big deal. And again, kudos to those of you in the room that do this work. In 1998, the Community Juvenile Accountability Act is a magnificent piece of legislation. It sets up the whole deal of by risk and matching and community involvement, where a child should go. And then it created long-term funding mechanisms that the state provides for juvenile justice youth. The King County Mental Illness and Drug Dependency Tax and Plan, we operate a family treatment court. It allows us to tax the public without a vote, 0.1% to 1% sales tax. Brings in about $50 million a year to King County, and that's how we fund a lot of this stuff in our therapeutic courts. And then we can sustain this and expand it to where it needs to go. Evaluation, we're all about that. The Institute, the UW here. Lots of other policies I could get into. I mean, the creation of this institute here alone is just magnificent. So a lot happened before the creation of the institute and all the work now going on across agencies. But the evaluation partnerships to us have been everything. I can't tell you how many different funds we have to go after and keep and fight for to make this happen. Cross-agency commitment, community engagement. Wherever failing is this menu is only for kids that have to surrender their liberty to a justice system. That is so wrong. That is just wrong. And what's happening now is a fantastic time in juvenile justice because our prosecutor, our partners, everyone finally is looking upstream. When a kid first touches the justice system, how can we have them not see the courtroom inside and not end up in a detention cell? So there's going to be a lot of creative things in the next 5 years. You have 3 diversions now per current legislation. That's an opportunity to get to these kids earlier, get them their behavioral health needs, and serve them without having a criminal record. One of my favorite slides. This is cool. So we looked at this trend data is successful. Actually, I should go like this. So filings have dropped 78%. Used to be about 8,000. Now they're under 2,000 from 1998 to 2013. That's amazing. There's not many all jurisdictions see a reduction in juvenile crime. That's absolutely amazing. Something is working here. This is detention. We used to have like up close to 200 kids. There are less than 60 in there today. and a reduction of close to 70%, 1998 through 2013. This is my favorite. This needs to be updated, but we have a 67% reduction in sending King County youth to JJ and RA. Phenomenal. We have closed 3 juvenile prisons in this state. That's another outcome that is just totally wonderful. And the reduction in our bed space locally, as well as the reduction of the kid prison system. So what's going on? How are we contributing to those wonderful trend data reductions with the contribution of evidence-based programs? So we looked at from between 2002 and 2011, 12,000 youth were sentenced to probation. By that risk assessment that I referred to, 8,000 were moderate or high risk to re-offend, which makes them eligible for these interventions. Nearly 53% of all those kids over that period of time received one or more evidence-based interventions. So something's working. It's not just salmon and the Puget Sound and this beautiful day. I mean, something is working. And one of my favorite, FFT's done some work with this. I think it'd be nice to work with the other family interventions and look at the possibilities of siblings staying out, because I gotta believe when that family intervention occurs, we're getting to kids too that are not initiating contact with the justice system. So families are getting healthier. There's a lot of other stuff going on, but this is what we use often to justify that we're on the right course. This stuff is really hard. Most of you know about fidelity, constant quality assurance. I get reports on every person, every therapist, every FFT therapist, anyone doing this work on their, are they doing it and adhering to the model? And we're always looking at that. We track everything. Who's referred, who's engaged. We look at that by race, provider, and community. Graduations, one of my favorite things is once a year in December, we get all the people that do this work around the table, we feed them, and we don't talk about data. We don't talk about outcomes. We don't talk about numbers. We just share stories about cases. And it's my favorite day of the year. It's just phenomenal. It's just absolutely phenomenal, the work that people are doing. So graduation is not only a therapeutic course, but celebrating success one family at a time. Here's something I'm really into right now. I don't really know what it is. Everyone's talking about trauma-informed stuff. So we've been, last couple of years, looking at, let's educate everybody in the court system on what that is, the impacts of trauma on their clients. Universal screening, and these change over time, but again, we've integrated trauma screens into everything we do. Engagement in a trauma-focused CBT, we probably could do a lot more of that, but we have that opportunity. We did an environmental assessment at the court. Are we compounding or increasing trauma by how folks go through our system? And one I gotta say is the love of my life right now, looking at the impacts of secondary trauma. So there's a woman you may know, Laura van der Noot-Lipsky, who authored Trauma Stewardship, an everyday guide to caring for self while caring for others. We had her conduct a symposium in December, and the model is, and now in fact, we just had a group 2 days ago, and then we're doing follow-up groups. We're gonna hold these regularly so that people can look proactively, preemptively at staying healthy, because you can't stop this suffering, but you can look at how we're dealing with that and how we can help each other keep moving forward. The outcome of that work is gratitude. That as a public servant, if you lose your gratitude, and when you're working with suffering, it's a real easy thing to do. Things get negative, people get cynical. If you lose your gratitude, you're not going to have the impact on your clients that they deserve. And when you do have it, it's amazing. And when clients see you deal with this, they're all more empowered to deal with their traumatic experiences. So I think that's that slide. Sorry this was so rushed. This middle one, programs do not improve the lives of children, relationships do. The science in this community, the menu of services that we have based on science is phenomenal. We have international guests come and they say, if we had this, it would be everything we want to bring back to our communities. It's nothing if you don't have the right people in front of these kids. They need to see their faces. They need to experience how you're receiving them. There's so much intuitive and non-head stuff that goes into this work. And we have just amazing people doing it. And then a couple stories, and then I'll end. This is from Roland Akers, who we had the peak of violence in the early 90s. We used to put folks up at Harborview when the gangbangers would come in, and we kind of de-escalate and get these kids connected to service. And one of those gentlemen was Rolling Acres. And during that time, our kid got a very serious injury. He had to be in a wheelchair for 5 to 8 years. He recovered. And when he was in his bed at Harborview, Rolling Acres looked at him and said, I know you can make it. You're going to make it. 8 years after that, he walked into a JRA office here in Seattle, walked up to Roland in a 3-piece suit. He was out of his wheelchair. He says, you told me that I could make it. I've come back to say thank you. The gratitude of both our clients and each other. Real briefly, just 2 other 30 seconds. The stories of when this stuff works is amazing. The kid in the MS-13, one of the most prison-entrenched gangs on the West Coast, who received MST, who got out of that life, got that junk off of his neck so he could walk the streets safely, and was back as a Latino family back at the home with their traditions and eating. We have, through our family integrated transition programs, my favorite story, the population that's most under my heart, because I used to work directly with them when no one cared or was out there, is our commercially sexually exploited children. The stuff they prevail over is just beyond God and fit. Went in the home of a girl that was being pimped on the street. During the course of that intervention, got that girl out of the life, separated from her pimp, back home with the mother, and the mother and that daughter got another girl that she knew in the life out of the street during the same time. So numbers, outcomes, reductions, saving the money that we do as a result of the partnerships in this room is great, but there's nothing more beautiful when you work to serve human suffering to hear these stories of just tremendous resiliency and success. So I think that's what I have.
Thank you so much. And if